James Carter had just returned from a long deployment overseas. He was a strong, calm, and polite man who had served his country with pride. For months he had been away from home, in tough conditions, far from the people he loved. Finally, he was back in the United States, in a small town close to his military base. He wanted to enjoy a peaceful evening, away from the noise and stress of his job. He had been looking forward to this moment for a long time. James decided to go to a nearby bar. It was a simple place, not fancy but comfortable enough. The bar was popular among the locals, mostly working-class people who came there to drink, talk, and forget their problems. The lighting was low, with a few neon signs glowing softly on the walls. The smell of beer mixed with fried food filled the air. A jukebox played old rock songs quietly in the background. As James walked inside, people noticed him right away. He wore his military uniform with pride, and his calm and confident way of moving made him stand out. Some of the patrons nodded at him politely, recognizing him as someone who had served the country. But not everyone was happy to see him. At one corner of the bar sat a group of bikers. They were rough-looking men, wearing leather jackets covered in patches. Their hair was long, and some had tattoos. These bikers were known in town for being tough and not afraid to cause trouble. They were loud and often drank too much, making the bar a tense place when they were around. When the bikers saw James enter, they exchanged looks. They did not like the fact that a soldier, especially a black soldier, had come into their usual hangout. They were used to being the ones in control, and they didn't want someone like James to change that. Some of them whispered to each other, and soon they started staring at James with cold eyes. James didn't say anything. He went to the bar and ordered a drink. He wanted to keep to himself and relax after a long day. He smiled politely at the bartender, a middle-aged man who looked a bit nervous. The bartender served James his drink quickly, then moved on to other customers. The bikers, however, were not satisfied with James's quiet presence. They began to make racist jokes under their breath, loud enough for him to hear. They muttered words filled with hatred and disrespect, trying to provoke James. They wanted him to react, to lose his calm. They thought that if they could get him angry, they could make him leave or cause a scene. But James was not the type to be easily pushed around. He had faced many difficult situations in the military, and he had learned to control his emotions. He kept his eyes forward and did not look at the bikers. He knew that reacting would only make things worse, so he stayed calm and focused on his drink. The atmosphere in the bar began to change. The other customers noticed the tension growing. Some looked away, not wanting to get involved. Others whispered quietly to each other, wondering what would happen next. The jukebox music seemed distant now, drowned out by the silent hostility between James and the bikers. One of the bikers, the leader named Chuck, decided to make the situation worse. He stood up and walked over to James. Everyone in the bar stopped what they were doing to watch. Chuck was a tall man with a thick beard and a voice that could fill the room. He sneered at James and made a cruel joke about his uniform and the place where he had served. James listened quietly. He didn't say a word. Chuck could see that James was not afraid, and that made him angrier. He wanted to intimidate James by bumping into him hard on purpose. James stumbled slightly but didn't fall. He looked at Chuck calmly, his eyes steady, without any anger. James picked up the glass that had spilled when Chuck bumped into him. He cleaned up the mess silently. The bartender looked uncomfortable but didn't say anything. Some of the bikers laughed loudly, thinking James was weak because he didn't fight back, but James's silence was not weakness. It was strength. He was waiting for the right moment, and he was showing that he would not be dragged into their anger. He had faced worse in his life, and he knew how to keep his cool. The people in the bar started to feel the tension more and more. The bikers kept whispering hateful words and making fun of James. They were trying to break him down with words, but James remained steady. Some of the regular customers wanted to help James but didn't know how. They were afraid of the bikers and didn't want to cause trouble. The bar was quiet except for the occasional laugh from the bikers. James's calmness was like a stone in the middle of a storm. James thought about his family, his friends, and his country. He knew he had a duty not only as a soldier, but also as a man who believed in respect and dignity. He believed that fighting with anger would only make things worse. So he stayed silent, showing that true courage was not about raising a fist but standing firm with honor. The night went on, but the tension never faded. Everyone in the bar was waiting for what would happen next. Would James finally lose his temper? Would the bikers start a fight? Or would something else happen, something no one expected? James's quiet strength was beginning to change the atmosphere. Some people started to admire him quietly, seeing a man who didn't need to shout or fight to show his power. Others still watched nervously, unsure if things would explode. As the evening continued, James finished his drink and looked around the bar. He saw faces filled with fear, anger, curiosity, and respect. The bikers kept talking, but their words lost some of their power against James's calm presence. By the time James decided to leave, the room was still tense, but something had shifted. No one knew exactly what the next moments would bring, but everyone sensed that James was not like anyone they had seen before. That night, James Carter showed what it meant to be truly strong. Not by fighting with fists or words, but by standing firm with quiet dignity. The story of his calm in the face of hate was just beginning. After the long, tense silence in the bar, the mood didn't improve. The group of bikers, led by a man named Chuck, were still watching James Carter closely. Their cold, hostile eyes never left him. The quiet that had settled over the bar was uneasy and thick, like the calm before a storm. The bikers were not going to let this moment pass without making a statement. They were angry, not just because a black soldier was in their territory, but because James hadn't reacted to their hateful words the way they expected. Chuck, the leader of the group, was a large man with a heavy build and a booming voice. His leather jacket was worn and covered in patches from many years on the road. His beard was thick and unruly, and his eyes held a hard, dangerous look. He had been the one to start the insults and had made it clear that he didn't respect James or his service. Chuck wasn't just a man. He was a symbol of the biker gang's dominance in the bar and in the town. Feeling that his words hadn't had the effect he wanted, Chuck decided to take the situation up a notch. He stood up from his seat and began to walk slowly toward James, his boots thudding on the wooden floor. The other bikers fell silent, watching their leaders move. It was clear they wanted Chuck to handle James, to show him who was in charge. When Chuck reached James, he stopped just close enough to invade his space, to make James feel threatened. He looked James up and down and sneered, mocking his uniform and his military service. "What are you even doing here, soldier?" Chuck said loudly, loud enough for everyone in the bar to hear. "You think you're some kind of hero? I bet you don't even belong here." James kept his calm. He looked at Chuck with steady eyes and didn't answer. He knew that words wouldn't help here. Chuck wanted a fight, and James was not about to give him one. Instead, he stood quietly, unmoving, like a rock that refused to be shaken. Chuck laughed cruelly and shook his head. "You're so calm," he said. "You're hiding something. I bet you're scared." The other bikers laughed, along with him, making the bar echo with their harsh voices. Suddenly, Chuck bumped into James with his shoulder. It was a hard bump, and James nearly lost his balance. His drink spilled on the floor, the dark liquid spreading quickly. The noise of the glass hitting the floor filled the room, breaking the silence like a gunshot. James didn't react with anger. Instead, he bent down slowly and picked up the broken glass carefully. Everyone in the bar watched him. His hands were steady and calm. He wiped up the spilled drink without a word. The bartender looked tense but said nothing, probably afraid to make things worse. The bikers kept laughing, thinking James was weak because he didn't hit back. But James's silence was a kind of power. He didn't want to waste his energy on a fight he knew wouldn't solve anything. James had learned during his time in the military that sometimes the best weapon was patience and self-control. Chuck, growing more frustrated, decided to push James again. This time he didn't just bump into him. He grabbed James's arm roughly, trying to pull him away from the bar. "Come on, soldier," Chuck sneered. "Show me what you got, or are you just a scared boy in a uniform?" The bar grew even quieter. Some people shifted nervously in their seats. Others whispered among themselves. No one wanted to get involved, but everyone was waiting to see what James would do next. James looked at Chuck calmly and said softly, "You don't know who you're messing with." His voice was quiet, but full of strength and warning. It was clear he wasn't scared, and he wasn't going to back down. Chuck laughed loudly again, but this time there was a nervous edge to his voice. He thought James was bluffing. With a sudden move, Chuck pushed James hard against the bar. James stumbled but didn't fall. He was steady, like a tree that could not be uprooted. The bar was completely silent now. Even the jukebox had stopped playing. Everyone's eyes were on the two men, waiting to see what would happen next. James didn't respond with violence. Instead, he took a deep breath and stepped back slowly, keeping his hands visible and calm. He didn't want to fight, but he wasn't going to let Chuck intimidate him. "Is that all you got?" James said quietly. His voice was calm but full of warning. Chuck's face twisted with anger. At that moment, a few of the bikers started to move forward, trying to join the fight. But James was ready. His military training kicked in. He was quick, strong, and precise. One biker lunged at him, but James stepped aside and caught the biker's arm in a firm grip. In one smooth movement, James twisted the biker's arm behind his back, making the man grunt in pain but not seriously hurt. The others stopped moving, surprised by James's skill. They realized this was not just a regular man. This was someone who knew how to defend himself and was not afraid to do so. Chuck looked furious. He tried to push James again, but James grabbed him by the wrist and twisted it gently but firmly. Chuck winced but couldn't break free. James lowered his voice and said, "I don't want to hurt you. I only want you to understand something." The whole bar was watching, stunned. No one had expected James to react so quickly and so calmly. They had thought a fight would break out, but instead they were seeing control and strength. Chuck struggled but finally gave up. James let go of his wrist and stepped back. "I fight for this country," James said. "Even for men like you." His words were quiet but carried a powerful meaning. He wasn't just talking about himself. He was talking about respect, honor, and the sacrifices soldiers make every day. The tension in the room was breaking, but the bikers still looked angry. They weren't used to being stopped like this. Chuck's pride was hurt, and he didn't know how to respond. James looked around the bar, seeing the faces of the people who had been watching silently. Some looked shocked, some confused, and some were beginning to respect him. James knew he had made an impact, not by fighting hard, but by standing firm and showing dignity. The bartender finally spoke, his voice shaky but clear. "That's enough," he said. "No more fighting in my bar." The bikers muttered among themselves but slowly backed off. They didn't want to cause more trouble, not tonight. James finished his drink calmly and prepared to leave. He looked at Chuck one last time. The biker's eyes were filled with anger but also something else. Maybe confusion or respect. James nodded slightly, then walked out of the bar. The night air was cool and quiet as James stepped outside. He took a deep breath and felt the weight of what had just happened. He hadn't started a fight, but he had defended himself and his honor. He had shown that real strength was not about violence, but about control and courage. As James walked away from the bar, the people inside began to talk quietly about what they had just seen. Some were amazed by his calmness. Others wondered if they had been wrong to judge him. The story of that night was far from over. It was a moment that would be remembered, a lesson in strength and respect that no one in that bar would forget. James didn't know what the future held, but he was ready for whatever came next. He had stood his ground, and that was all that mattered. The moment in the bar was heavy with tension, the kind of silence that makes everyone hold their breath. The bikers, led by Chuck, had pushed James Carter too far. James had remained calm through insults and provocation, but now the situation was about to change. Chuck's face twisted in frustration and anger. He had underestimated James's strength and calmness, and that mistake was about to become clear to everyone. Without warning, Chuck threw a punch. It was sudden and fierce, meant to hit James hard and start a fight right then and there. But James was ready. Years of military training had made him quick and alert. He didn't just react. He moved with precision. He dodged the punch easily, stepping to the side before the blow could land. His movements were smooth, like a dance practiced many times. James caught Chuck's wrist with a strong grip. The room seemed to freeze as James twisted Chuck's arm behind his back, controlling the situation in a heartbeat. Chuck gasped in surprise, caught off guard by James's speed and skill. The other bikers stared, wide-eyed and silent, unsure what to do next. The bar had gone completely quiet. Not a single person spoke or moved. The only sound was the heavy breathing of the two men locked in this silent battle. James didn't tighten his hold. He didn't want to hurt Chuck. Instead, he held him firmly enough to stop the fight, but not to cause pain. It was a careful balance of strength and control. James looked Chuck in the eye and said calmly, "I didn't come here to fight." His voice was steady and serious. "But I won't let you disrespect the uniform or the people who wear it." The words carried weight, a meaning deeper than just the moment. James was standing up for himself, for every soldier who had served with honor and faced discrimination or hatred. The other bikers looked shocked. Their leader was disarmed and held in place, yet James showed no anger or desire for revenge. Instead, he showed respect and calm. It was a power that no punch or insult could match. Suddenly, one of the other bikers charged at James, ready to fight. But James was faster. He moved with a speed that surprised everyone. Using controlled movements, he dodged the attack and used the biker's own momentum to bring him to the ground gently but firmly. The biker landed hard, but was unharmed. Another biker stepped forward aggressively, but James met him with the same calm strength. Within moments, two more bikers were on the floor, unhurt, but clearly outmatched. The fight James fought was not one of anger, but of control. He showed the difference between violence and strength. The bartender, who had been watching nervously, shouted, "That's enough!" His voice cut through the tension like a knife. The remaining bikers hesitated, then slowly backed away. They knew they had lost this fight, not just because James was strong, but because he had the courage and self-control they did not. James stood tall, not angry, but firm. His presence filled the room. He looked around at the stunned faces of the bar's customers and said, "I didn't come here to fight. I came here to relax, but I will never let anyone disrespect the uniform or the people who wear it." His words were clear, strong, and full of meaning. The bar was still quiet. The bikers muttered to each other, realizing that their plan had failed. Their leader, Chuck, was speechless. His pride was hurt deeply, and he didn't know how to react. For the first time, he saw James not as a target, but as a man of honor. James took a deep breath and slowly began to calm down. He didn't want to cause more trouble. He wanted the night to end peacefully. The other patrons, once afraid, now looked at James with respect and admiration. They saw not just a soldier, but a man who stood for something bigger than himself. In that moment, James became more than a visitor in the bar. He became a symbol of courage, dignity, and strength. He showed that real power does not come from violence or anger, but from control, respect, and standing up for what is right. The bikers, humiliated but unharmed, quietly left the bar. Chuck gave James a long, confused look. There was no anger in his eyes anymore, just something new: respect, or at least understanding. Then he disappeared into the night, leaving James and the others behind. The customers in the bar slowly began to breathe again. Some smiled, others whispered quietly. A few even clapped softly, their applause a small but powerful way to honor James's courage. A woman at the bar stepped forward, breaking the silence. She thanked James for his service, her voice filled with genuine gratitude. Others joined her, saying they were sorry they hadn't stood up for him sooner. An older man, a veteran from another war, shook James's hand. Tears filled his eyes as he said, "You reminded me what real strength looks like." James accepted the thanks humbly. He didn't want to be a hero. He just wanted to live his life with honor and respect. That night, he had done more than defend himself. He had taught a lesson to everyone in the bar about courage, dignity, and the power of calm strength. The story of that night didn't end there. It spread quickly, reaching the military base and the town around it. People talked about the black soldier who had stood his ground against racist bikers and won, not with fists, but with respect and skill. Days later, Chuck surprised James by coming to the base. He wanted to speak, to apologize. Chuck said he never really understood the military or the men who served. He admitted he was angry and scared, and that had made him act badly. James listened. Then he said something that surprised Chuck. "It takes more courage to admit when you're wrong than to throw a punch." That moment of honesty changed something between them. Chuck left with a handshake, no longer an enemy but a man who had learned respect. Back in the bar, life slowly changed. The bikers stopped causing trouble there. The place became more welcoming to everyone, and the memory of James Carter, the soldier who stood strong without raising his voice, lived on as a lesson for all. After the heated night at the bar, James Carter didn't expect everything to settle down so quickly. But surprisingly, things began to change in ways no one anticipated. The story of the black soldier standing strong against the group of racist bikers had spread around the town like wildfire. People were talking about it everywhere, in the streets, at the market, and even in the local schools. It became more than just a story about one night. It became a symbol of courage, respect, and hope. James returned to his military base with a quiet confidence. Though the tension in the bar had been intense, he had remained calm and respectful throughout. He had shown the power of self-control and strength without violence, and that had left a deep impression on everyone who witnessed it. The support from his fellow soldiers was immediate and strong. They admired how James had handled the situation, knowing it took true courage to face hatred without losing dignity. Back in the town, the reactions were mixed but mostly positive. Many people were inspired by James's actions. Some who had been silent before started to speak out against racism and injustice. They realized that change was possible if they stood together and refused to accept hate. A few local leaders began organizing meetings to talk about how to improve relations in the community and create a safer environment for everyone. Not everyone was happy with the change. The biker gang, led by Chuck, was deeply shaken by what had happened. Chuck's pride had been hurt, and his gang felt embarrassed that their plan to intimidate James had failed. But surprisingly, Chuck didn't disappear or continue causing trouble. Instead, something inside him shifted. After his conversation with James at the military base, Chuck started to see things differently. Chuck realized that anger and hatred had controlled his life for too long. He had been stuck in a cycle of violence and fear, and meeting James had opened his eyes. Chuck began to question the values he had lived by, and slowly he started to change. He reached out to community leaders and even attended some of the meetings organized to promote understanding and respect. The town was still far from perfect, but the changes were real. People began to talk to each other more openly, breaking down old barriers and prejudices. James's courage had sparked something new, a desire for peace and respect among people who had once been divided by fear and hatred. James himself stayed, humble through it all. He didn't see himself as a hero. He was just a soldier doing his duty and standing up for what was right. But he also understood that sometimes one person's actions could inspire many others. He continued to serve with honor and respect, becoming a role model for young soldiers and civilians alike. One day, a group of young people from the town approached James. They wanted to learn from him, to understand how to be strong and respectful, like he was. James took time to talk with them, sharing stories from his life and lessons he had learned. He told them about the importance of self-control, courage, and standing up against injustice without hatred. The young people listened carefully, inspired by James's words and example. They decided to start a group focused on promoting respect and understanding in the community. They called it the Peacemakers. Their goal was to create a place where people from all backgrounds could come together, share their stories, and work toward a better future. James supported the group fully. He helped organize events and spoke at their meetings. The Peacemakers began to grow, attracting more members and making a real difference. They held workshops at schools, organized community cleanups, and even started a mentorship program for troubled youth. Slowly, the town began to heal. Meanwhile, Chuck and his biker gang started attending some of the Peacemakers' events. It wasn't easy for them at first. They had to confront their own prejudices and fears, and sometimes old habits died hard. But the more they listened and participated, the more they changed. Chuck even apologized publicly for the way he had treated James and others in the past. The transformation in Chuck and his gang surprised many people. It showed that even those who seemed the most set in their ways could change if given the chance and the right support. Their story became a powerful example of forgiveness and growth. James's military career also took a positive turn. His bravery and leadership during the incident at the bar were recognized by his superiors. He received a commendation for his courage and professionalism. But more importantly, James felt proud that he had made a difference, not just by defending himself, but by inspiring change in the community. As months passed, the town became known for its new spirit of unity and respect. The bar where the fight had happened was transformed. The owner made changes to welcome everyone, regardless of background. He hired staff from different communities and encouraged positive conversations. The bar became a symbol of hope and change, a place where people could come together peacefully. James continued to visit the bar, but now the atmosphere was different. People greeted him warmly, no longer with suspicion or hostility. The bikers who had once been his enemies now respected him and even invited him to join their rides, as a sign of newfound friendship and understanding. Through all these changes, James remained focused on his values. He knew that true peace required ongoing effort and commitment. He continued to stand up against injustice whenever he saw it, but always with respect and calmness. His story showed that courage was not just about fighting. It was about making the world a better place through strength of character. The story of James Carter and the biker gang became well known beyond the town. Newspapers wrote about it, and people from other places came to learn how the community had changed. James was invited to speak at events and share his experience. He used these opportunities to encourage others to stand up against hate and work for unity. James's journey was not easy. There were still challenges and moments of doubt, but he never gave up. He believed in the power of respect and courage, and he saw how those values could transform lives and communities. Looking back, James understood that the night at the bar was just the beginning. It was the moment when things started to change, but the real work came afterward. It was in the conversations, the meetings, the acts of kindness, and the willingness to forgive that true healing happened. James's story became a lesson for many, that even in the face of hatred and violence, there is always a choice. The choice to respond with courage, dignity, and respect can change not only the outcome of one night, but the future of an entire community. And so, the black soldier who had stood his ground against racist bikers became a symbol of hope and strength. His actions showed that real power comes from within, and that standing up for what is right can inspire change far beyond what anyone expects. The town where it all happened was never the same again. It grew into a place where people could live, together in peace, learning from each other and building a better future. And at the heart of that change was James Carter, the soldier who chose to fight hate with courage and respect. After the tensions at the bar and the changes that followed, life began to settle for James Carter. Yet, deep inside, he knew his journey was far from over. What had started as a night of confrontation had blossomed into a powerful movement for change, not just in the town, but within the hearts of many people around him. Part 5 is about how James's courage and calmness continued to ripple outward, influencing more lives, shaping futures, and proving that one person's strength and kindness can truly change the world. In the weeks after the bar incident, James found himself unexpectedly at the center of attention. Local newspapers, radio stations, and even television crews came to interview him. They wanted to hear how a soldier had faced down a group of angry bikers without losing his dignity or respect for others. James spoke carefully, knowing that his words could inspire many but also wary of becoming a symbol he didn't want to be. For him, it was never about glory or fame. It was about truth, courage, and the power of respect. His calm and honest answers made a big impression on people. James shared how his military training taught him more than just how to fight. It taught him how to stay calm under pressure, how to control his emotions, and how to treat others with respect, even when they didn't return it. He spoke about the importance of standing up for yourself and others, but without hatred or revenge. More importantly, James spoke about forgiveness and understanding. When asked about Chuck, the biker gang leader who had tried to provoke him, James said something that surprised many. It takes more courage to forgive than to fight. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do afterward. These words touched many hearts, especially those struggling to move past anger or fear in their own lives. Inspired by James's story, schools in the area invited him to speak to students. He visited classrooms and shared his experiences, not just about that night, but about his life as a soldier and the values he lived by. James encouraged the young people to believe in themselves, to respect others, and to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. The students listened eagerly. They asked questions about courage, about handling difficult situations, and about how to deal with people who might hate or judge them unfairly. James answered each question with patience and kindness. His stories sparked hope and determination in the young hearts, many of whom were dealing with challenges of their own. At the same time, the Peacemakers group that had formed after the bar incident grew stronger. Led by local youth with James's support, the group organized events, workshops, and community projects. Their work focused on promoting understanding between different groups, breaking down stereotypes, and helping those in need. They built friendships across racial and social divides, proving that even the deepest wounds could heal with effort and kindness. Chuck and his biker gang became unlikely but powerful supporters of the Peacemakers. Their transformation was inspiring, though they still carried the tough look and roar of motorcycles. They no longer used their presence to intimidate others. Instead, they used their strength to protect their community and stand against hate. One day, Chuck surprised James by inviting him on a long motorcycle ride. At first, James hesitated. After all, their first meeting had been anything but friendly, but Chuck's sincerity convinced him. The ride became a symbol of friendship and respect. a shared journey toward a better future. During the ride, Chuck opened up about his past, the fear, anger, and pain that had driven him to lead a gang of tough bikers. He admitted that meeting James had made him rethink everything. For the first time, Chuck felt hope instead of anger. James listened without judgment, understanding that real change takes time and compassion. Their friendship became a bridge between two very different worlds: the disciplined life of a soldier and the wild freedom of a biker. Together they showed the town that people could change, that enemies could become friends, and that respect was the strongest bond of all. James's influence reached beyond the town as well. Military leaders took notice of his courage and leadership. He was promoted and given opportunities to mentor other soldiers, teaching them not just how to fight, but how to be strong in character and spirit. His story became part of military training, inspiring soldiers to face challenges with dignity and respect. Despite the attention and praise, James stayed grounded. He often reminded himself that true courage was not about medals or recognition, but about everyday choices, choosing kindness over anger, respect over hatred, and forgiveness over revenge. He kept these values close to his heart, guiding his actions both on and off duty. At home, James found peace in simple things: a quiet evening with friends, a walk in the park, or helping at community events. He understood that peace wasn't just the absence of conflict, but the presence of understanding and kindness. The bar where it all started became a symbol of change. The owner, inspired by the events, made sure the bar welcomed everyone. It became a place where people from different backgrounds gathered not to fight, but to talk, share stories, and build friendships. James was often invited to speak there, but he always reminded people that the real heroes were those who chose to change, forgive, and grow. Over time, the town itself changed. Old prejudices faded, replaced by respect and cooperation. People learned to celebrate their differences and work together for a better future. The story of James Carter became a reminder that change is possible when courage meets kindness. One of the most powerful moments came when James was invited to speak at a large community event celebrating unity and peace. Thousands of people gathered to hear him speak. James shared his journey honestly, the struggles, the fears, and the victories. He spoke about the power of standing up for what is right and the importance of forgiveness. His speech was met with thunderous applause. Many in the crowd had been touched by his story, inspired to make their own communities better places. James's message was clear: change starts with one person's courage and spreads through many hearts willing to listen and act. As the event ended, James looked out at the crowd and felt a deep sense of gratitude. He knew the road ahead was still long and sometimes difficult, but he also knew that hope and respect had taken root. And that was the greatest victory of all. The story of the black soldier who faced racist bikers had become a beacon of light in a world often shadowed by hate. James Carter's journey showed that real strength comes from within, and that anyone, no matter their background, can make a difference. Years later, people still told the story of that night at the bar and what came after. It became a legend, not because of violence, but because of courage, respect, and forgiveness. James's legacy lived on in the hearts of those who believed in a better world. And in that better world, people stood together, not divided by fear or hate, but united by the strength of their shared humanity.